I don't do this very often, so I have no idea how long it's going to be. So I just need to keep an eye on the time. Should still be in time for lunch. Okay, before sunset. Today is day 365, 2 days from the one-year anniversary of October 7th, 2023. 365 days since the Hamas-led murder and capture of 1,400 Israelis, mostly Jews, some Bedouins, nearly half of those taken or killed from foreign countries or possessing multiple citizenships, including several Americans. Our hearts are broken for those killed on October 7th, for those who have returned and are clawing their way towards healing and wholeness, and for the remaining 101 hostages who remain in captivity in tunnels and elsewhere in Gaza. We also cannot look away from and ignore the ongoing death and destruction of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians in their cities at the hands of Hamas and the Israeli army. I pray for competent leadership that will step in and help them begin to heal the spiritual and physical trauma that they also have been dealing with over the last year. I'm here today to share about my recent experience visiting Israel back in the beginning of July. It feels like a long time ago. It's a strange feeling when you hope every day that things will get better, when so much has happened in the 3 months since then, and yet somehow things are still devastatingly the same. I do want to acknowledge that there have been 2 turning points since my visit, with the assassination in the beginning of August of Fouad Shukar, a senior Hezbollah leader, and Ismail Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, and then again this past week with the bombardment of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And in general, the media's attention that has sort of shifted towards southern Lebanon and away from Gaza, which was really the focus more of the last 10 months leading up to it. This war is not going to end next week, and we still have a physical, emotional, and political mess in Gaza that they need to figure out. My trip was organized by my cantorial organization, the American Conference of Cantors, or the ACC, composed of cantors who primarily affiliate with the Reform movement, though there are a few of us who came through Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary, and serve non-Reform congregations like SAJ. The ACC has a regularly planned trip to Israel every 7 to 10 years, and this was supposed to be my year to finally join them. My first time back to Israel since I lived there for a year in 2004, 2005, for my first year in cantorial school. I was really looking forward to the visit, see so many beautiful faces and places, and taste the food and smell the spices of the shuk, or the market. Needless to say, once October 7th happened, the trip organizers needed to pivot and re-envision what our visit would look like. There was no hesitation on my part about continuing with the trip, drawn by the need to be with our people, to be in community with our cousins and our kehillah who have been mourning and suffering and arguing with their government all these months. I'd had the Talmudic phrase, Kol Yisrael arevim ze bazeh, all Jews are responsible for one another, swirling around my mind, and so the pull to be there soon evolved into an inescapable gravitational force. The hope was to go there to witness and listen, to volunteer and offer support and comfort, to show up and spend a few shekels to help the local economy as well. Before I share the details of what I saw and learned, I want to acknowledge that this trip was organized by a very specific group of people with a specific agenda, which is really true of any organized trip. But while I appreciate being able to see what I saw and hear the stories I heard, I am very aware of the people and places we did not meet and see. We did not go into the West Bank, so there was no organized opportunity to really encounter non-Jewish Israelis, other than one Arab Muslim who spoke with us, who I'll talk about a little later. Nor was there any organized opportunity to meet with Jews whose religious observance and political persuasions were different from those of the progressive community in which we were situated. I will say that as much as the country felt segregated in my previous 2 trips there, the separation this time around felt a bit more potent. The parsha this week, Ha'azinu, is a goodbye poem from Moses to the people of Israel. It acts as a reminder of the main teachings of the beginning of Deuteronomy, that Israel is stubborn and unreliable, while God is great and generous. Since we believe that we humans are made in the image of God, I take this to mean that we are capable of all of those qualities, of both greatness and generosity, as well as stubbornness and unreliability. And so much of what is currently happening in Israel reflects all of those aspects. A little bit about my history with Israel, so you can get a sense of where I was before. So I mentioned I was last there in 2004, 2005 for my first year in Cantorial school. I was also there for a semester during my undergrad time. I lived in Haifa and studied Technion, and was able to travel around the whole country both times, and see the north, south, and everywhere in between. And this trip was really just a very focused, partially because of time, but also because of security constraints. We were really centered around the middle of the country, mostly in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and a little bit of the Gaza envelope, which is the towns and kibbutzim that sort of surround the Gaza Strip. It's taken me a while to digest all that I saw and to figure out how to organize it in a way that will be meaningful to you. But I think I've been able to make enough sense of it to be able to invite you on a journey with me this morning, one that travels from devastation to coping and healing, and ultimately a little bit of hope. Some of what I share with you may be a bit graphic, so I want to make you aware that it may be upsetting or hard to hear. And if you're at all concerned, you could leave a little bit, and I can let you know when it's a little bit easier to stay, but mostly okay to listen. I'm sharing these stories today because what's happening there is not just happening to a country or a community, but to the individuals who make up that community. Individuals who, to their families and their entire worlds, were mothers, fathers, children, siblings, whose survivors are praying every day for their release, or so that the stories of their loved ones' horrific deaths do not go unheard. These are just the people and places that I saw, and there are thousands of other stories of human suffering from this war, of Jews, Muslims, Christians, Arabs, immigrants, that we must also not forget. We begin with witnessing the devastation. When you walk around Tel Aviv, what you see on the surface is a bustling, hot, sunny city with lots of shops and cafes open, tons of residents visiting the beach to play volleyball or take surfing lessons. But when you stop to talk with anyone, and I mean anyone, they each have a story of pain, grief, fear, or anger, or a little of all of it. During my time in Tel Aviv, before my program officially began, my friend and I stayed at a hotel, and after passing the same guard several times over our few-day stay, we ended up chatting a bit with him. He noticed we were American, and he had what would become a common reaction to our presence in Israel: surprise and gratitude. Why would we be there when it's so dangerous? And also, thank you for not forgetting us. Though his family was not directly affected by the events of October 7th, he was making plans to leave Israel. He's scared for his child to go to school and later to serve in the army, and hoped that his connections during his semester abroad in Chicago will help him get a job and a place to live there soon. We noticed that every morning at breakfast at our hotel, the ballroom was packed with people who we soon found out were evacuees from the north and south of the country. A total of 600,000 people, that number was true in July, and sadly I think it's still true today, 3 months later, who are still displaced from their homes, either because of rockets coming in from Hezbollah in the north, or because their homes or neighborhoods in the Gaza envelope were decimated on October 7th. We would see mothers taking piles of bread, boxes of yogurt, and packed salad containers back to their rooms so they would have food for meals later in the day. Families living in hotel rooms for months, where their children turned the hotel pool and lobby into their summer play spaces, running and roller skating from one end to the other, because that was their home. Through our ACC program, we heard directly from families whose loved ones perished or were kidnapped on October 7th. First, we heard from Shir and Shaked Matthias from Kibbutz Cholit. Both of their parents, Deborah and Shlomi, were killed, and they recalled the story of their brother who was with their parents at the time. He had called one of his sisters from the safe room in their house and said he was fine, but he was underneath his dead mother, who had thrown herself on top of him to shield him from the coming gunman. We heard from Jackie and Yaron Vital, the parents of Addie Vital Kaplan, who was also massacred on October 7th in Kibbutz Cholit. That morning, her husband was out on a hike, and she was home alone with her kids. Her father, Yaron, was visiting for Simchat Torah and staying at the kibbutz in a guest house next door to her. She was killed protecting her children and was posthumously nicknamed the Lioness because of this, a reference to a song by Shiri Maimon that I'll speak a little bit more in a little bit later. They later found out that the Hamas terrorists had lists of every person who lived on the kibbutz and exactly which buildings they lived in. A total of 15 people were murdered and 7 were taken captive from there. Addie's father, Yaron, survived only because there was no one listed as living in the guest house where he was staying. Her 2 children were among those captured, along with her neighbor, Avital, who was instructed to care for the children and forced to wear several layers of dresses because she was supposed to dress modestly in Gaza. Thankfully, they were released before they crossed to the border and returned the same day. When we visited the Jerusalem campus of HUC, a professor there, before her teaching, shared a story about her cousin, Anna Shapira, who was at the Supernova Music Festival with Hirsch Goldberg Polin, his best friend. He and 24 others sought shelter from the Hamas terrorists, and Anna managed to bravely defend their space and save the lives of the 10 people from tragedy. As Hamas fighters tossed grenades into their crude shelter, Anna stood in defense and threw them back. 7 successfully detonated outside the shelter, but sadly the last one did not. Anna was a poet and musician and wrote a beautiful song called Jeruz based on Psalm 137 that is beautiful and haunting, and especially haunting to listen to after his death. By the way, all of the music that I speak about and the organizations that I'm going to reference today are, there's a list of them on the back of your handout if you want to read more about them after my talk. When we visited the town of Ofakim in the Gaza envelope, a chef named Osi opened her home to us to feed us. She was an amazing cook, so of course I bought her cookbook, and to share the story of her friend Igal. Igal was a police officer, and on October 7th, he had just gotten off duty at 6 a.m. when the violence started. So he still had all his gear with him, including a bulletproof vest and a helmet. He managed to kill 5 terrorists and save 7 people that morning, and was only felled when a terrorist who was on top of a house was able to shoot at the one part on his body that was not protected by the vest. Osi herself was safe on October 7th and fled to Tel Aviv for 2 months to deal with the trauma. She cooked meals for soldiers and found that cooking was healing for her and had given her a new purpose in life, which is what she was doing full-time now back in Ofakim. After Ofakim, while still in the Gaza envelope, we visited both the site of the Nova Music Festival as well as Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Approaching the Nova site in the middle of the Negev desert, you can see in the distance both memorials to those who were slain as well as burnt-out cars that were originally carrying fleeing concert-goers. As we got closer, I could see that though the area had just a few trees and shrubs, there were very few places to hide. And I could not stop imagining what it must have been like to be there on that day with no really good place to escape to. There were memorial posts erected for each person who was either kidnapped or murdered there, as well as an art installation of metal kalaniot, red anemone flowers that flourish in the Negev during the winter months and are actually the Israeli national flower. While we were there, our ACC group held a memorial on the site, and at some point, other visitors slowly filtered in and joined our group. Some soldiers who had also just been visiting the area had also joined us, and at the end of the ceremony, one of them was so moved by it, he asked if he could address our group. This was completely unplanned and unprompted, so it made his words that much more powerful. David, if you can bring that video up, I brought it with me here today, so you can hear an excerpt from it. You can also watch it; it's behind you as well.
Most of us lost friends, lost family in this day, and for us to see your support, we just came here like by the way, and we saw you, and then all of us came very emotional for your beautiful ceremony. And we want to thank you as Jews before we are Israelis, because for us, we always look at you like you live in a safe haven. But now we understand there is no safe haven for us, nowhere on earth. So we are for you, and who knows what the future is going to bring to you guys, but you need to stay strong abroad for yourself and for us, and we are together in the same boat, and keep strong, because we can here protect ourselves, and you know. And we see the anti-Semitism, and there is a lot going on inside the Jewish community, reforms, Orthodox, conservatives. For them, they don't give a shit about it. They don't care. For them, we are Jews. Like we are Jews for Antifa in Manhattan, and like we are Jews for the KKK in Alabama. For them, we are Jews. Like in the 40s, and like in the 30s. So we want to thank you guys that you make all the way over here. You put your life in danger.
Sorry, the audio was not great, so if you had trouble understanding, please find me. I have the video on my phone. It should be a little bit easier to understand. The sun was blisteringly hot, and the site was enveloped by an eerie silence that will haunt me for the rest of my days. In Kfar Aza, the destruction was still in full view when we visited in July, as the major sections of the kibbutz that were attacked were left as evidence of what happened. Nearly every house had bullet holes and collapsed roofs or sides. They also had spray-painted numbers and letters, codes created by the army to designate who was found there, victim or terrorist, and if they were alive or dead when they were found. A large picture of each victim or hostage who was taken was affixed to the outside of their homes, so that the growing number of pilgrims to this site will know who each of these people were. People like Doron Steinbrecher, Ziv Berman, Gali Berman, Nitzan Lipstein, and Keith Siegel, an American hostage who still remains in captivity. The pictures are there so that it's clear that these weren't just slabs of concrete. They were places that were transformed from someone's home into their worst nightmare. I know we talked about breaths before, so I want to invite you to take a nice, rejuvenating, renewing, resetting breath with me. That's the end of that section. Coping and finding healing. All over the country, just as in the city, but even more so, there are pictures of hostages everywhere. Pictures of loved ones, not only photographs of them, but other images as well. There's various artists, innumerable artists who created artwork based on the headshots of the hostages who were taken. And when I was at one of the Saturday night rallies, an artist was giving out, I don't know who funds these, but they were giving out posters of everyone who was still a hostage, just hundreds of pictures. And so I just wanted to share this with you today. This is one of the many things, and they're plastered all over the country, as well as on social media as well. This is Naomi Levy, just one of the 101 who are still missing. The entrepreneurial spirit of the of the Israeli people came into action very soon after the acts of October 7th. Brand new settings for healing popped up almost immediately to help survivors, bereaved family members, and returned soldiers to deal with their pain and PTSD. Places like Chavat Marpeh, Healing Space Rishpon, which helps people deal with the mind-body experience of trauma. The space allows groups to cycle through a series of various therapies like yoga, meditation, cooking, sound bathing, candle making, and purposely no talk therapy. If afterwards a person needs additional support, the social workers there assist them in finding the right place. The morning after we visited Chavat Marpeh, we visited a place called Molet, a collective of specialists and artists who bring people together to make usable items from used wooden pallets as a way to cope with pain and trauma. So it's a place of both healing and sustainability. All projects involve transforming used wooden pallets, which were originally used for transporting large items and normally get tossed when they crack or break, into an item that will be used in a needy community. So it's both for making needed products, but also gives those dealing with intense emotions a chance to focus their minds on using their hands to build and create something. The day we were there, we were given the opportunity to see what that's like, so we made wooden planters that were going to be used for temporary housing for a community of displaced people from kibbutz Kisufim, another kibbutz in the Gaza envelope. These planters will hopefully been put in place to be used either to grow food or plants or flowers to make their temporary homes a little bit more comforting. After our grueling visit to the Nova site and Kfar Aza, we stopped at a local army base to feed dinner to soldiers. It was sponsored by an organization called Smiles for the Kids, which arranges chesed, or good deed opportunities for volunteers to bring happiness to those who need it most. So they do events not just for soldiers, but Miluim families. That's where somebody is in the reserves who are also going out. It's usually when their families and the reservists are a little bit older, so they usually have full families and kids at home, and just in general, helping other families who are affected by war. The food they arranged for us to serve just seemed like regular cafeteria food, but to these soldiers, the food was a big step up from what they were usually served, and it was served by people who wanted to serve and take care of them. A few of us, instead of serving food, were handing out donations that we had collected before we arrived. Countless numbers of dry fit shirts to be used when active, and then electrolyte packets. We had to really sell them on the electrolyte packets because they had never seen them before. Most of them had never seen them. So while they're very popular here, it was definitely something new and actually very useful for them. Electrolyte packets it's like sugar and salt and some other things that you pour in water, so that when you're out in the desert, you are a little bit more rejuvenated rather than just having plain water. The last thing I want to share in this section, not only for healing, but also was an active sign of hope, was the weekly protests in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and throughout the country, which originally formed to protest the Israeli Supreme Court coup that pivoted and joined forces with the hostages and missing family forum to make sure that no one forgets about the hostages and the growing list of victims of the war. At this point, the goal of the protest had changed its focus, as most families decided by this point that they preferred a ceasefire deal to get the hostages returned over ongoing missions into Gaza to forcibly retrieve them, since that would put additional Israelis in harm's way. Every week on Saturday night in Tel Aviv, the event begins with Havdalah, led by the Israeli Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. I was fortunate enough that I managed to meet up with SAJ's own Noah Dresner Pismoni, who had been living there, you guys know the story, in Israel for the year with his family, Oren and Barak. So it was nice to see a familiar face, but also he helped explain to me a little bit what was going on and what to expect at the protests. Havdalah was followed by the protests that every week has a different theme, which that week, the theme helped to frame the music and the speakers that were brought in that week. So that night that we were there, it was the 9-month anniversary of October 7th. So the theme was Tesha Chodashim V'Hayeladim Lo Kan, Ima Leolam Lo Mevateret. 9 months and the children are not here. Mommy will never give up. The event lasted about an hour or two, and the musical guest, Shiri Maimon, performed her song, Ima, a moment of collective grief so powerful I cannot think of it without tearing up. Here's a translation of some of her lyrics. Mother, look at your makeup, hug me, kiss me, hold me back so I don't know that everything around here is a mess, that it's dangerous. Lie to me that you have space protected that doesn't frighten and won't hurt. Hides another tear in the body of a lioness mother hero. How she hides that it's hard, that she's reached her end. Again, she doesn't reveal herself a hero, and her cloak is a bit torn. Towards the end, they listed, and then everyone repeated, the name of all the remaining hostages, which at that time was 120, and it ended with the singing of Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel. In addition to seeing the continuing bustling culture of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, it was heartening to hear about other places where folks are coming together to choose life, as we spoke about during last Saturday's sermon, which right now feels very long ago. Much of what we saw on the trip was focused on shared society, the concept of the diverse cultures and religious communities coming together to live side by side and share in creating a peaceful civil society. This is by no means thoroughly common throughout the country at the moment, but the fact that it exists means that there is hope, that it is possible to live not just beside, but with people from the Arab and Muslim communities. First, we heard from Mohammed Darwashe, a renowned political analyst and expert on Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. He introduced himself by saying that his family had lived there for 800 years, 26 generations, and that, quote, he didn't immigrate to Israel, Israel immigrated to him. There were three main areas that he talked about where we can be hopeful for a greater shared society in Israel that are active today. He first explained that about 72% of Arab citizens, just to give a better understanding of them, they consider themselves hyphenated identities, meaning that they are all some combination of Arab, Muslim, Palestinian, Christian, Druze, or Bedouin, Israeli. The first area he talked about was in the medical industry, and Paul Kotel, who was also there over the summer, can attest to this. He was a nurse at Hadassah Hospital, and also he said that about a third of the staff are Arab Muslim. So this is true in medical settings like doctors' offices and hospitals, but also in medical schools and the manufacturing sector of medical equipment. The next area he talked about was schools and universities. He said that in 2003, the Arab population at Israeli universities was about 3%, but they really wanted to increase and improve the shared society, so they went back and reflected on the entrance exam for universities and realized that it was inherently biased against non-Jewish Israelis because it was originally only offered in Hebrew, which for many non-Jews was not their native language. So they offered it in Arabic, and then they made sure to be mindful of cultural differences like fasting during Ramadan. It's not easy to do well on a test if you're fasting, and to not offer that exam during that time. And so by this year, the Arab population at Israeli universities is around 20%, which is a huge increase, and really bringing people together to learn side by side in academic settings. Lastly, there is good old capitalism to bring people together. Companies like Bank Luemi and the food brand Osem realized that in order to expand, they needed to hire new workers. So they expanded their worker pool to include Muslim and Arab Israelis, and they also sought to make more money by widening their customer base. And so they were offering products that would also be appealing to non-Jews. So there's been a concerted effort, at least in these various settings, to be more welcoming and bring people together from diverse backgrounds, though it's, still a work, very much a work in progress. The other place where we saw hope for a shared society was in the arts. We visited with two groups who are actively and purposefully finding Jewish and non-Jewish members to create bonds over a common love for music and art. The first was a group called Polyphony, an orchestra made of 22 Arab and Jewish musicians, founded by a violinist, Nabil Aboud Ashkar. We heard them play, and they were amazing. And then we got to sing a few songs with them. And you really just want to emphasize the point that it's harder to hate someone when you are in an ensemble with them and you're creating relationships in the group, and you start to respect people for their artistry and their musicianship. The other place we visited was in Jerusalem, a place called Feel Beit. They are a house of arts and culture on the seam line between East and West Jerusalem, meaning between the Arab Muslim side and the Jewish side in West Jerusalem. So we listened to some music that was collaborated on by both Jews and non-Jews. We ate food prepared by Jews and non-Jews and experienced art being made by Jews and non-Jews. I wish we could have seen more places like this, and I pray that those there continue to find places of commonality and mutual interest, whether it be making money by opening up a company's customer base, or saving lives in the medical industry, or simply making art, though they still have a long way to go. This was an extremely powerful trip, and I wish I had many more hours to tell you about what I experienced. If you'd like to see pictures of where I went, I'll be sharing a photo album upstairs during Kiddush. I wasn't able to talk about everything today, but there will be descriptions next to the pictures so you can get a visual sense of the people and places that I did talk about today, as well as the places that I didn't get a chance to talk about. I'm still very heartbroken for our Israeli, both Jewish and non-Jewish cousins who continue to endure violence from all sides and from within, as well as for Palestinians living in their seemingly endless political limbo. Without inspiring or competent leadership, should there be a one-state solution or a two-state solution, though these days, sadly, most Israelis, even on the far left, no longer believe that a two-state solution is possible, at least in our lifetimes. I still struggle daily to wrap my head around what is happening and how I can be helpful, doing what I can by showing up at various rallies and calling my congresspeople more often than I ever have about an issue. I want to end today with two things. First, a prayer, and then a song. Today, I pray for the voices of justice to be louder than the voices of inequity, the voices of democracy to be louder than the voices of fascism, the voices of hope to be louder than the voices of despair, the voices of art and creation to be louder than the voices of destruction, the voices of love and mutual respect to be louder than the voices of hate. Please join me in singing Ben Adam, one of a number of songs that's become increasingly popular in Israel over the last year as a song of protection and hope. The lyrics are, they're based on the writings of Rav Kook, and the melody is by Avigail Uziel Amar, and the lyrics are in your handout. Ben Adam, alei lemala alei, alei lemala alei, Ben Adam, alei lemala alei, Ben Adam, alei lemala alei, alei. Alei lemala alei, ki koch az lecha, yesh lecha kanfei ruach, leish lecha kanfei ruach, kanfei nesharim abirim, atikachesh bam, ben yikach hashu lecha. Ben Adam, ve'yimatzu miyad. כן ייקחשו לך